the technical difficulties, and we're ready to roll. So, we will now consider item 7.2.2 regarding Municipal Law Enforcement 2023 Year-End Report, PD 09-24. The Manager of Municipal Law Enforcement will provide introductory comments. Mr. Barkway, please go ahead. And you have a captive audience that has returned, so wow them with your report.
Good evening, Council. Appreciate you taking the time to hear me out, and I'm pleased to provide you the year-end report for 2023 for municipal law enforcement. I just want to highlight a few things throughout the report itself. I think you've all received a copy of it already. I'll just say that the efforts made daily by the officers within municipal law enforcement are reflected in the successful completion of numerous investigations, files, both reactive and proactive enforcement of the bylaws that we have within the town. And this is no simple task. Investigations lead to interactions with property owners, whom rightfully and understandably have a vested interest in the areas that are being addressed at that time. Notably, within one of our bylaws, clean yards, we tend to have a lot of conflict. You are talking to property owners and suggesting other ways or things that may not be up to standard. And castle doctrine comes into play, and people are very defensive about being told that they're not looking after their property or may not be looking after their property properly. So the officers use a lot of tactical communication, and they have a lot of successful completion of those files. A recurring area that we have in municipal law enforcement, other than parking, would be the noise-related complaints. Those typically fall into events, concerts, celebrations that are happening on properties, be it private property, like individual ownership, or with a business that's operating, such as some of the wineries or establishments that hold these concerts or wedding receptions or parties. And my office and myself, we work diligently with both the operators and the people that live in the area that may have a concern about the noise or the level of the noise and the amount of noise or the regularity. And we try to work with both sides to try to come to successful conclusions. And I would say the majority of the time we do so. We also continue to have meetings with the other local area municipality, municipal law enforcement managers, always trying to make sure that we're able to apply the investigations and enforcement of the different bylaws through the Municipal Act, the Building Act, the Planning Act, consistently from municipality to municipality where at all possible. And we also strive to find ways to shorten times and save money, and I'll speak about some of those later on in the report itself. In the town of Lincoln, we have upwards of 25 bylaws that my officers and myself, we deal with and investigate and enforce. There are 4 officers, 3 full-time and 1 part-time officer, and 1 full-time administrative staff that's shared with Public Works as well. And the investigative enforcement activities typically fall into 2 areas. It's either property-related homes and parking-related. Some of the areas that we deal with that I'd like to highlight are the alteration of grades, the placing of and dumping of fill within our site alteration bylaw. And we do get several of these a year. A lot of them deal with trucking, and the amount of trucks, the amount of fill that's being brought into properties, the use of the roads, and either the fouling the roads or just the what appears to be excessive number of trucks that are coming to or from a site. And we work with both with the planning department, the Ministry of the Environment, and whatever their regulatory bodies may be involved. And we contact and speak with the property owners, speak with the contractors, make a determination, look at what's agreed upon within the site alteration permit itself, and make sure that there's adherence to those. In the past, we've had 2 within the last 2 years where we've had to take it into seeking injunctions in order to stop work being done. And those have been done, and I would say that in both cases it's been successful, and the property owners or the owners involved have complied with the orders and with the injunctions. Public nuisance and with light trespass. We do get these regularly. Some of them are with businesses. and some of them actually fall within the private property, residential areas. And the officers that are involved in that listen to the complaint, look into the allegations or the concerns, and then they attend, altering their shifts, working into the later evening hours, trying to make a determination based on their observations of what's going on, what isn't going on. Sometimes that even includes seeking, inviting into the homes of the complainants to see if the light trespass is entering into the home or not, or if it's just entering into the property. They do have the authority to work with the property owners of the people that have the lighting to try and make some amendments to what they have in place, whether it's taking it down, whether it's light shields, or whether it's lessening the degree of the wattage or the luminaires that are included in the lighting system themselves. Traffic and parking, that's daily, hourly with my officers. They are not just parking enforcement officers, but they do, as a regular part of their daily patrol and duties, they do respond to complaints, and they also do proactive enforcement in all areas within the municipality. Clean yards, as I touched on before, is an area, especially now in the spring coming into the summer, clean yards is something that we will deal with more in regards to regular maintenance of properties, the length of the grass or weeds on the properties, and we will work the property owners. If we have to issue an order, we wish issue an order. What would come after that, if there isn't compliance, there could be a charge laid, but there will also be a contracted work going on to the property to bring the property in compliance, and then the cost of that would be deferred back to the property owner through property taxes to be recouped. Noise control, as I touched on earlier, we do have noise control complaints, the noise control bylaw, and I'm continuing and actively working with a few of the operations right now that notably last year had some noise complaints, trying to work with them and the people that were involved that had the concerns to find successful resolutions to those to mitigate the problems. I'd just like to touch quickly on the calls for service. I'll note that there is, in 2023, there was 897 calls for service, and in the year previous, in 2022, there was 893. So a slight increase, and I will note that the majority of the calls for service were parking complaints, and the second after that would have been clean yards. So when I accentuated the problems with clean yards before, it is a regular thing with us, especially through the spring, summer, and fall months. But at all times of the year, clean yards is a high second to parking that we deal with. Parking infraction notices, otherwise or endearingly known as parking tickets in the town of Lincoln. I will say in 2022, my officers issued 303 parking infraction notices. In 2023, my officers issued 650. That's well more than double. And my hat was tipped to all my officers who made a tremendous effort to try to increase that. Still doing it fairly, still taking the approach of engaging people when possible, but it's enforcement. If we have a new provision, that's something where there'd be more education and engagement, but at this point in time, there isn't anything new, and we are enforcing the parking control bylaws that we have. I will note as well, because this was brought up and questioned at a previous meeting, from the time that we started keeping track, I can say that 410 parking infraction notices were issued in a proactive manner, and 171 were in a reactive manner, so in reacting to a complaint that was filed with municipal law enforcement. The snow clearing provision that we have was the newest provision within, and that came into account several years ago now. And I will say in the 2023 snow season, we had 43 parkas to interfere with snow clearing charges that were laid. I will note that parking screenings, I am the screening officer for the town of Lincoln. I'll say in 2022, we had 38 screenings that I conducted. In 2023, we had 106. So that's quite an increase, which is an extra demand on my officers. It's also a result of extra parking tickets, parking infraction notices that were issued, but it's also an extra demand on myself, time taken for the screenings. The majority of them are still done telephone or written, but I have more people now, since we're well past the pandemic, that are asking to have them in person, so that's time spent at town hall with the people in person. And I'll just note that the total revenue from the parking tickets for 650 was $31,080. Of that, outstanding is still $14,460. Some of that was, at the time of this report, was just tickets that may not have been paid, and a lot of that would be ones that have gone to the plate denial process through the MTO. So that's recouped when and if people renew their license plates for the where the set fine's been put to after AMPS 1 and AMPS 2 has been done. After a period of time, then it goes to the MTO plate denial process. So people then trying to renew their license plate, used to be renewing their VAL tags, but now it's renewing their license plate. They won't be able to do so until they pay the fines that are outstanding. So, and that goes not just with our municipality, but any municipality that has the AMPS process, and they've gone this route as well. So. In regards to noise exemption permits, I'll just say that in 2023, we issued 76 noise exemption permits from May to November, and there was 58 the same time frame in 2022. And as I've already spoken to, we do work with the people involved to try to make it as successful as possible. The Crossing Guard program continues, and we do continue to have our orientation in August, full training day for the Crossing Guards, which I believe is more than some municipalities actually do. And we attend and do physical, actual on-site training with the Crossing Guards to ensure they can do it at various locations, different types of intersections, different types of crossings, to make sure that they're all following the procedures that we ask them to follow. I can speak to if there's questions about the animal control portion of that, but they are a contracted service, and they deal with 99.9% of any animal control complaints that we receive. And moving forward, as we look ahead through 2024, we're going to continue to work with the other Niagara land managers to provide consistent training for the officers. We are enabling a mentorship program with other bylaw officers as well. And this is being done through programs that are being implemented with the region's help. We looked at cost sharing through purchasing of uniform equipment through one supplier in bulk purchases instead of every municipality doing their own separately through different suppliers. That'll help with the uniforms being consistent, or the possibility of being consistent, but also cost sharing endeavor bulk purchases as opposed to individual. There's always a continued need for better communication for the officers while they're on the road, and we're still working on that endeavor, but nothing solid at this time. And I'll note that the officers will be changing their shifts as of beginning of May until the end of October for the spring, summer, and fall season, with the majority of the park patrols, noise complaints, and just be additionally present for additional parking-related offenses in the after hours. And we continue to communicate with the Niagara SPCA and Humane Society. That is our animal control provider, and we're working to have some community engagement throughout this year for different events that they can participate in or be in attendance with, or ones that they're wanting to initiate throughout the community in regards to including Coyote Watch and adoption and licensing. And with that, I'd just like to thank you for listening to me, and I'm open for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Councillor Timmer, start us off, please.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Through you to Mr. Barkway. Not an easy job, I'm sure. I don't think I'd want your job, to be honest with you, because I think it can be very difficult at times for you and your officers. Just looking at the breakdown, like 897 complaints. So are those all individual, like 897, or was there like a complaint that was filed like 10 times on the same thing that was counted? Like, I was just curious about that, because that's a lot of complaints.
Sure. Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I can actually clarify that 897 are individual complaints.
Okay.
And I did put a note in there, but maybe I didn't explain it well. I would say that the number is actually higher because a lot of complaints, if they're noise complaints to the same location for the same event, they would have been compiled to one by file, which is how we record them. So the number is actually in excess of
Even higher?
897.
Okay.
Same with the noise complaints, parking complaints, if it's several people calling about the same vehicles in the same area, and odor complaints, light trespass complaints, anything where there's multiple, they'd be put into one.
Okay, I was curious about that, because that's a lot of complaints. The number is actually even higher.
Yes.
Okay, so just the other thing about the parking infractions, it seems like a lot of people are not paying their parking tickets. Like, there was a lot of outstanding monies due. And then you talked also about the screening. So when you do all of these screenings, is it ever found that the ticket is, taken back or forgiven, or?
Yes, there are, so there are three options that I have in decisions I can make as a screening officer. One's to affirm it. Affirming means that the set fine stands and the allegation is confirmed, so it stays or it's substantiated. The second is to withdraw it, and if it's withdrawn, there's no more set fine and the ticket's withdrawn. And the third option is to affirm that the allegation was substantiated, but then based on the information that's provided by the appellant, I have the option to amend the set fine. So the set fine can then be reduced by any certain amount, depending on what the explanation is given. There are emergency situations, medical, lack of awareness, financial. There can be a lot of considerations that are taken into account.
So are there times that they are taken back?
Yes.
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 Okay, just curious about that, but that's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Renchema.
Oh, thank you, Chair Pachariva. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about, so if I have submitted a complaint, one of the ones you talked about was property standards and clean yards bylaw. And if I had submitted a complaint about my neighbor, let's say, I didn't, but if I did, just saying, just to be clear, I know that when people reach out to me and they say, okay, my neighbor is not taking care of their lawn, I'm trying to sell my house, for example. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in that, they're trying to sell their house, and I'm thinking of a specific example, actually. And they feel that the neighbor's property is preventing them from being able to sell their house. So they're very anxious about it, they want to sell their house. And I know that you, as a department, you have a lot of work to do. You also have privacy concerns. You have to protect the privacy of the person against which the complaint is, to which the complaint is directed. But so if I'm a complainant about my neighbor's property, I'm trying to sell my house, for example, what can I expect in terms of being kept up to date? Do you have okay, we got a complaint from so-and-so, that we should respond to them at 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months? How do you decide when you get back to the complainant and what you share with them?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. We don't have a set time frame for responding back to the complainant once the investigation is implemented. However, there is initial acknowledgement of the complaint, verifying the information, gathering any further information from the complainant if necessary. And as the investigation unfolds, if it's in regards to a clean yards, if there is an order issued, there'd be a time frame that is given to the property owner to comply with that. And it would only be after that compliance date is done where there would be initial steps taken by municipal law enforcement to contract out and get the work done. I know that there have been instances where the people that have called in and have expressed a concern in regards to situations such as yours, have asked for
It's not my
some sort of,
situation.
have asked for an update in regards to what's taken place. I usually, if that comes to myself, I usually check with the officer, look at the report, see what's done, and I'll provide them with an update at that time if the officers haven't. It is something that is still being refined with my officers in regards to how quickly or how repetitiously the officers respond to a complainant. If it is something that I recognize that some people have a more vested interest, such as an example that you've provided, where the perception of people that may be coming to the property to look at for purchasing may have a concern based on the neighbors. But I would still say that the officers have to follow due diligence in regards to in the way they're investigating. If there's ever a concern with the lack of communication, well, that's something I receive and I would express to my officers and make sure that follow-up communication does take place. But I don't have a set time frame for the officers to respond.
Okay, thank you. I know that, that's quite often what we hear people expect, or they want, I don't know what they expect, but they want to know what's going on. They've submitted a complaint and they want to know what's happened. And they say, nobody's telling me. And I'm not saying that always happens, but when I do hear that, that's what I hear, because they want to hear back. So my question to you was, is there a standard time frame or a standard, I don't know, I think that might help people when they're upset about that kind of thing. They want to know when to hear back and just want to know that somebody's going to get back to them. It's difficult. It's a difficult balance for you when you're dealing with neighbors that are upset with each other. I recognize that. So thank you for that. And I have another question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Double the amount of parking tickets from 2022 to 2023. To what do you attribute that to? Could it be that there's more residential units coming on board? And then you said that you had 410 proactive tickets in 2023 and 171 reactive. Is that part of the reason that a number of parking tickets went up from year to year, that more of them are proactive?
Through you, Chair, I would say that there's probably a combination of factors that are involved with that. One is me encouraging my officers to try as best they can when they do have free time, and that free time is not always available to them to do the extra patrols for parking enforcement. And we do not have a downtown core such as St. Catharines or downtown Toronto or Hamilton, where they would have officers. In St. Catharines, they have commissionaires that walk around and are able to do parking enforcement and just patrol the streets like that. Out here, we don't have that ability or in that general area. So the officers are having to drive and patrol the area. And one of the more consistent offenses in parking enforcement would be to park more than in excess of 24 hours. A lot of times that would be based on a complaint, so reactive, because you can't go around and measure in time every vehicle that's parked on every street in the municipality and then check back 24 hours later. With 3 officers and, the majority of the week, 2 of them are working out of the 3, that's quite a task. So I think there's a lot of individual effort by the officers to afford themselves some time on their daily shift to do enforcement, and a lot more of that is coming from their own initiative as opposed to complaints, but there are an awful lot of parking complaints as well, and they take time and energy from the officers as well. So, but I would say the majority of it is from their own personal enforcement.
An increase in proactive enforcement, okay. And a third question, Mr. Chair. Sunday active or Sunday bylaw enforcement. Who do we have on Sundays? Do we have anybody on Sundays? And is it just part of the year, or how does that go?
We do not have a bylaw officer or a municipal law enforcement officer that's scheduled to work on Sundays at this given time. I do know in 2022 and 2023, I did have my part-time officers work random Sundays to try to keep track. And I did not see that there was, I wish I had the stats in front of me. I can look and respond to you about that later, but the call volume was next to nothing. reports or complaints that were received on a Sunday were next to nothing. I'm not saying there was never any, but there was very few to justify having an officer working a shift on that day when there was next to anything in regards to enforcement or investigation for them to be doing. But I did have that for two summers from May until September to try and get a handle on the need or the perceived need of that on a Sunday. If it is something that's desired, then it's something that can be worked on. But
Okay, well, that's interesting to know. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Renchma. Councillor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to Mr. Barkway. Thank you very much for your report. So similar to Councillor Rinjma's question, I just want to kind of ask a spin-off question. So the infractions, went from 303 to 650 in 2023 from 2022. It's taking up, out of 897 complaints, 397 of them, 45% of your officers' time are being spent on parking. So, we've gone through the whole education process and, now we're talking about proactive and reactive. Do you see us getting to the point where, this 650 is gonna level off? Like, we've doubled it in 1 year. If we were to double it again in 2024 and go over 1,000, you're gonna be in front of us for more staff. So I'm just wondering, how do you, like I say, it's 45% of all the complaints that your officers are dealing with. How do you see parking complaints, trending as we move forward?
through you, Chair, thank you for the question. I would say that reflective in the stats that we have, as you pointed out, it's 45%, if not more, of the call volume, the complaints that we receive on a yearly basis. And I think that I don't see that number going down. I think that is probably a realistic average year to year in regards to what we receive for complaints. The anomaly would have been during the pandemic. We had additional complaints based on COVID-related complaints, but I think from my time here, I would say that most likely the parking trends would be probably within the same realistic amount. 45 to 50% of the complaints that we do receive would be parking related, just due to the dense population that we have in some of the areas. That's where the majority of the parking complaints come from.
So through you, Chair, just to follow up on that, Mr. Barkway, so as you allude to, some of the dense population just happens to be in Councillor Patrick and I's ward in Ward 2 with the development that we've seen over the last 4 years. So we do get a lot of calls, and I appreciate, your response and your team's work on this. There have been a number of complaints that have come through us as councillors that we bring to you, bring to your attention for your officers to work on. I know there have been cases, and I'm just wondering, I know you work very, very closely with Public Works, but I'm wondering, when you look at the number of these parking issues and then you break them all down to, parking too close to a stop sign, et cetera, how many of these things are you, is your staff handcuffed where we don't have proper signage out there and we need to improve that signage so that enforcement can occur because maybe someone's parking and it's an infraction, but somebody's going, yeah, but where's the sign to? I know there's been cases where we've interacted, we've had communication, and there's been that cases. Is that an anomaly, or is that something that we need to work on in terms of better signage?
Through you, Chair, thank you for the question. I believe that the majority of those issues are one-offs. I don't feel that we have a lot of issues with a lack of signage within the municipality. We have added some signs, but there is not an onus to have a sign for every part of every provision within the parking parking control bylaw posted. We actually added 2 years ago, I believe it was, to the boundary entries to Lincoln, the parking in excess of 24 hours. That was something that wasn't there before. It's not mandatory, but we did that just because there were people that were suggesting that they weren't aware that that's the case. There is an onus and a responsibility on the individual to educate themselves to what's going on. And I would suggest it's much like things within the criminal code. It's not like there's a poster up saying that you can't do X, Y, and Z, but it's things that people are should be aware of or can make themselves aware of. We do have our bylaws that are available within the Town of Lincoln, on the Town of Lincoln website, and that's where we go to the engagement and education part. There are times where people just aren't aware of parking provision that we have, and we take that into account. And even if they do receive a parking ticket, they have the option of going to a screening and going through the screening process. And I do take that into account as the screening officer. And if it is something where there is actually a total lack of awareness, it is reasonable. They're brand new. They'd only been there for a month. They weren't aware of this bylaw as opposed to where they were living previously. That's something I would take into account and speak to them about and look whether it's something to take into consideration. But I don't feel that there's a lack of signage within the Town of Lincoln for our parking as far as where we're, but it's a one-off, and we do look at each case. If somebody does complain about it, we do look into it.
That's great. I appreciate that. Councillor Patrieva, if I could just ask an additional question. So I can't find it in the report, but there was something that I did see when preparing for the meeting in one of the appendixes where it made a comment about ensuring the safety of the municipal officers. I'm wondering if you're in a position to elaborate on that. Obviously, as Councillor Rinjema alluded to, when maybe your officer's going out to a neighborhood where someone's called about a clean yards, I'm sure that can be maybe a heated situation. But there is something in the report that talks about you working with the region and ensuring the safety of your officers. Wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Through you, Chair, thank you for bringing that up. Given my background, officer safety is something that is paramount. It's very important. Right now, we have 3 full-time officers and 1 part-time who work different shifts throughout the week, Monday to Saturday. So there isn't always those officers work individually and patrol, respond to complaints. You don't have the luxury of having a second person with you when you go to some of those investigations. And it's only after the fact when you realize that this has been a negative interaction or this is a heated interaction where you then say, next time I go to the property, I'm going to ask somebody else to come along. So then you have 2 officers. So then there's 2 officers out of the best day 3 that are working, that are tied up into one investigation just to make sure that the officer is safe. The other part of the officer safety, that ensuring the safety of the officers, it is the communication system that we have right now. Everybody has their work cell phone, but if something is taking place, you don't have the liberty of getting your work cell phone out and calling a number. And working towards having a unified communication system throughout the region for all the municipal law enforcement officers is something that we're all working towards, to have a reliable communication system similar to that of the police or the fire department, where there's a dispatcher that's available that can handle and know where the people are, and if there is something that's needed, that there can be a response at that given time instead of not knowing where somebody is, or even just booking on and off for the beginning and end of a shift, to know that the officer's accounted for by the end of their shift. The officer's working till 8 or 10 o'clock at night. They have nobody right now to check in or check out with at the end of their shift. So I'm doing that myself. So if we had a dedicated communication system with the dispatcher that would be working, then they'd be able to account for those officers. Another part of the safety of the officers is the training. Municipal law enforcement, it is individual. So there isn't, it isn't like, there isn't training like they would be for the fire department or for policing at a centralized location where they get it. So everybody gets their own training, and a lot of it is online at this point. We're working with all the other LAMs and with the region. We have some centralized training that's going on. We're actually, and the region is actually on a committee working with the provincial body to try to have standardized training for all municipal law enforcement officers that's done at an accredited facility where they go to and have at least a 2-week or 3-week training program so that they come out with some hands-on credible training and it's standard, so that if an officer moves from one municipality to another, you know what you're getting from that officer, what the background is, what the officer is going to have, and it helps them when they interact with the public as well. So.
So through you, Chair, I appreciate, Mr. Barkway, that detailed explanation. It informs us, some of the challenges that you're dealing with and the, the heightened awareness that you need to keep your officers safe and the work that you're doing with the region. So I think I'm at like 2.7 questions, but I'm just wondering, through you, Chair, this council has continued to make an investment in municipal law enforcement. I think it's a big part of our community now in ensuring that our community is safe and that, we're reacting, where necessary. And I think your officers have continued to make great strides in this. And I guess through you, Chair, my question or my ask would be, we look at other aspects of the organization, whether it be economic development, whether it be public works, and we get reports like this on a quarterly basis. This is a wonderful report. I guess my question would be, or my ask, or my hope would be that we could maybe see this report maybe on a quarterly basis. And I'm not trying to put you in a corner, but I think this is a wonderful report, and I think that municipal law enforcement has, elevated to a point where it's important that we're talking about this on a regular basis and not once a year. But that's not to take away from what you're bringing here this evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brunei, and thank you for your response to Councillor Brunei on the education, Mike, because one of my favorite shows growing up was Dragnet, and Jack Webb playing Joe Friday, and one of his lines was always, "Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse." So I think by, maybe coming on a quarterly basis and getting these reports, and then picking up on communications and getting it out there, right? So the public is more informed. And we saw that with Councillor Foster's report on the speed cameras and the rationale why they took down the flashing lights. Because, people would say, well, when I went by, the light wasn't flashing. And that's the defense that they use. So appreciate that. Councillor Russell, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, first, I'd like to reiterate my thoughts as well and support to see if we can get these reports on a quarterly basis as well and have this communication. I think it's great to get the insights from you directly, and if we can get this more often, I think that's fantastic. My question through you, Mr. Chair, is in Ward 1, and I think probably maybe in Beamsville in particular, we seem to have a lot of highly sensitive, or at least a few highly sensitive residents that seem to be report, at least to council, and I do know that they also report to bylaw as well, on what they perceive as infractions by neighbors, but oftentimes they're not. They're just behaviors that they do not like. Wondering your thoughts on how we should deal with that on an ongoing basis, because it doesn't seem to ever go away, even if we try to rationalize maybe what is happening and why it may not be against a particular bylaw. It doesn't necessarily seem to stop the behavior or the interest. I'm just wondering your thoughts on how you would like that handled. Like, I have a hard time putting things over to bylaw if I don't really think that it's, again, a need, or it's going to, I think that sometimes it's burdensome to your and your staff. What are your thoughts on how maybe we could deal with that?
Thank you, and through your chair, thank you for the question. Valid point, and I think that there isn't a way to change the behavior. I don't think that's something that we, myself, I don't look at trying to do. If people want to complain, if they want to call and ask, I've directed my officers to listen to the complaint, hear it out, look into it, and see if there's any validity to it. If there isn't validity, they won't move forward with the investigation. But I hesitate to ever shut somebody down and say that we're not going to at least hear them out. I think an important thing that we can do is just let people know that they can be heard. If it takes us 5 or 10 minutes to hear them out or to read an email, and I'll formulate a response to them if I have to, or if a counselor that receives the email responds, it's appreciated as well. But I don't know that we could ever do anything that would stop people from feeling like they want to be heard, and I wouldn't want to stop somebody from allowing them to be heard. It's just how much time you give them and be able to politely explain back and let it go from there, so.
Okay, no, thank you, and I appreciate that. And again, I know that I don't want it to being encouraging behavior to have it kind of facilitate more complaints or more concerns being raised. But again, if you're okay, if we keep on passing them over, and because again, it may be not a big issue to me or to you. It may be a big issue to them. They may be, again, as I mentioned off the top, a little more sensitive to their surroundings. But again, if you're willing to work with them, then again, we'll keep passing it over. So again, I appreciate your time and appreciate your staff's time as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you too, Mike. Thank you for the report. Yeah, you have an interesting job. I think your officers have an interesting job. It's not, it requires a certain tact to deal with the public, and I like the enforcement. I like the uniform. I like the respect it generates, and as well the patrols that are that I see throughout the neighborhoods. I think that people see that, they recognize that, and they behave themselves when they see that sort of activity with our bylaw officers. So the question I have is with respect to 897 calls. When I look at the report and I look at the numbers and the data, I see very little on cannabis, only 2 throughout the year, which that's pretty good. What are the calls that generate or chew up the most time for yourself or your officers?
Through you, Chair, thank you for the question. I will just clarify again that 897 is a number of complaints, but I will say I would suggest that within that obnoxious odor, which would include cannabis, light trespass, parking complaints, there will be multiple into one. So even though the number for obnoxious odor may be 2 for the year, I would suggest that there's 2 open files, and there have been a lot of complaints, more than 2 in those files with an ongoing investigation. I can say that for sure. And that would be the same thing with parking complaints. It may be one street, and you may have 2, 3, or 4 people that live on that street or are in that area seeing parking violations that call and complain about it, but we lump it into one and deal with it from there. So even that 897 doesn't truly reflect the number of actual investigations or complaints we receive. It's just the base number. In regards to what takes up the most, again, parking complaints is a large number. You're looking at just under half of our investigations are parking-related investigations. And clean yards is another large portion of our time, property standards and zoning. Noise increases at this time of year moving forward, so some of it is seasonal and some of it is just, but parking is standard throughout the year, is one of the main generators of complaints and calls for us.
Thank you. And it leads me to another question that I come from an industry, I come from a background where there was a certain amount of time allocated to certain repairs, like, when I was doing what I was doing. And, there's this, Tim Hortons has like a clock that, we service this many customers in this many minutes or whatever it is. And I'm just curious, because given the nature of some folks within this town, I experience it myself. Is there an expectation from enforcement officers where, hey, look, we can't spend 2 hours talking to somebody, you know, working with somebody, you know, on something like noise, or like, is there an expectation as far as an amount of enforcement when dealing with the public? I ask that because I just worry that there could be a lot of time spent on the same 3 or 4 individuals that make these possibly vexatious complaints.
Through you, Chair, thank you for the comment and the question. In regards to vexatious or frivolous
Yeah.
complaints, if we do have something that's received, the officers are identifying it, that it may be this, they bring that to myself. We have a discussion. I review what they're basing that on, and then I'll make a determination based on history, what other files we have, the complaints, and what's been determination by any previous complaints that would have been filed by that person, received from that person or the individual. And if it is deemed that continually it's been unfounded, there's nothing to it, there's nothing there, then I would follow up with that, and I'd be the one speaking to the complainant and letting him know that the investigation's being closed, there's nothing to substantiate the allegation, and we won't be moving forward with it. So in regards to the amount of time that's spent on it, I can't speak to every officer about what they do on every file, but I would say that affording the person the time to be heard can be anywhere from a couple of minutes to possibly an hour. And if there's an inspection of a property involved, it can take a lot longer than that. And then there's reattendances and other inspections, orders being issued, there's follow-up investigations and search that has to be done. There's a lot of people hours that are involved in investigations. So I don't know if I could give you a number about how long somebody deals with an individual one-on-one, either over the phone, email correspondence, or in person. But I feel from what I've seen and the feedback I've gotten that my officers afford everybody the time that they need. And they have the opportunity that they can stop a conversation if it's not leading any further or what have you, but they do try to respond to the people and give them the time, and then respectfully reply to them with what they need done.
Thank you very much. And I do appreciate that. I do know it's a challenging subject. It's one that I deal with personally when I'm meeting with people, and it's like, man, I gotta go, you know, like I can only spend so much time with this, you know, I have to go. So I do respect and I do appreciate the challenges that your enforcement officers have with working with the general public. Some good customers and some challenging customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michalak. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much, Mr. Barkway, for your report. I can certainly see the evolution to the way business is going and the way you're responding to it. I am concerned that we have very good knowledge of the variety of complaints, but I can't judge from it what the workload is. And you could say, well, the workload is something that you would discuss with the CAO, and it would be determined that additional staff would be required. And I understand that as well. So I guess I'm wondering, when are you going to have that conversation with the CAO? Because it sounds to me, I think it's come up a few times, that there's a lot of work in these numbers, and we don't really know whether we're reaching the threshold of we need more staff or what is exactly happening. So it's possible, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Barkway may have some answer, but when the report goes on the floor, I'd like to ask the same question to the CAO, because I would like to know what that threshold is starting to look like for us. But anyway, let's see what Mr. Barkway would have to add.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Your Worship. I will say that respectfully, I would always appreciate more staff for the workload that the officers have. But I also recognize that there is an accountability to the community as well in regards to the amount of financial resources that are put into municipal law enforcement. I do anticipate that with the implementation of the short-term accommodation bylaw, if that moves forward and is passed at some time, I would anticipate down the road, looking at other municipalities and how they work at the enforcement process of that. That's going to require dedicated officers just for that. And I would suggest that in cases like that, circumstances like that, if that's going to be required here, that a dedicated officer works on that, then I would suggest then there would be additional staff needed to replace the officer that's moved from what their general duties are now to a specific role within, say, a short-term accommodation enforcement process. But I do know that what we're earmarking right now, if that does become a reality, is that all my officers are being educated in regards to the totality of the short-term accommodation, and they would all be able to have a part to play within the enforcement investigative process. But I do think that down the road, that would most likely have to follow suit with a lot of other municipalities where they have dedicated staff for it. In cases like that, I would think it would be something where there'd be a great conversation to have. And I appreciate that suggestion and that question. And I don't really have more of an answer for you.
Okay, all right, that's good, Mr. Chairman. So let's look at cannabis then. So we have two major events, I guess. Maybe they're two different locations, I can't really tell. And I'm thinking that these have cost us a lot of money because there isn't compliance. The odors are just as bad as they ever were. And so I want to be able to support a quarterly report or a report that deals with, that addresses more contentious issues where you want council to have a much better understanding of the lay of the land. And would that be a fair statement?
Through you, Chair, yes.
Okay, all right. And then I noticed that the snow clearing, it's only, I think it's 45 or 43, is that 43 episodes? Where where 43 tickets were given out? That's not very many. We must have wonderful compliance to our clear the roads policy. Is that true?
Through you, Chair, I would say that the majority of the residents of Lincoln do their utmost to adhere to the provision that we have with the snow clearing. And I think there are locations and circumstances that bring us to respond. But I would say that even the 43 probably isn't a true reflection, because I think there are times when perhaps that snow clearing, the complaint is viewed, but when the officer attends, the vehicle is no longer present, but was there at that time. So I think there are times when the vehicles have been there, but hasn't been recorded because the enforcement wasn't able to take place, because much like any other parking enforcement, it had gone before the officers are there.
Right,
So-
okay, gotcha. I think that's 3, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Barkway. But I do have a question when it comes on the floor.
Well, we can ask that now because I think the CAO is prepared.
So I don't know whether this Okay, all right, so you heard my question, Mr. CAO, and I guess I'm looking for a little more, because we're, in many cases, we're looking at more absolute numbers. When Public Works comes and tells us that the incidents or the ratios are X, Y, or Z, that's as close a number as we're going to get. And then there may be a cost assigned that, or there may be personnel assigned to that. So you've got this sort of, you're marching along, you're learning what the circumstances are, and you're also getting a pretty good idea of the kind of thinking that's going behind it. But that's not how this is done, and I'm not questioning how it's done. I just want to make sure that the public expectation around bylaw, Mr. CAO, is being met, and that we're close to making sure that we maintain that expectation.
Through Mr. Chair to the mayor, so a couple of different questions in there, your worship, so maybe I'll make a couple of comments. I know we highlighted everything from short-term accommodations and what that means in terms of enforcement. I know as recently as today, we talked about a tree bylaw and we talked about what enforcement both on private and public property looks like with respect to that. And I know Councillor Brunet raised that question around the thought of more municipal law enforcement to address that. I know Mike and I and Director Bruder are often chatting about resources, looking at multiple ways to tackle it, everything from student officers in the summer to address some of the more easier issues around parking, although sometimes those parking issues start off easy and turn into something that's not easy, I think, as Mike shared with you, to looking at increasing our part-time officers to full-time officers, and I think those are all on the table. If I go back to short-term accommodations and some of the comments you heard at that time, I think we're also looking at that policy. Less restrictive ultimately means less enforcement in that particular area. It's also cost recovery as best as we can, so if we can come to you and find options where you're not putting out additional tax dollars to address some of those FTE requirements, then I think we're going to try to do that. I can say, and I think Mike's characterized it, we're doing a good job with what we have right now. I think our next immediate step probably looks like us increasing our part-timers to more full-time hours, and again, trying to find additional ways we can bring in some more part-timers, we can look at some more seasonal options, and those are the conversations we're having. As for community expectation and feedback, I think that's something that I'd like to discuss further, maybe with Director Deanne and Liliana, our manager. Maybe it is some sort of surveying we do. Do people want more enforcement? I think it's a double-edged sword. We hear people want more enforcement, and I know every time we're out there enforcing in a community, enforcing in a neighborhood, we hear the opposite. What were you doing? There's extenuating circumstances. What about this particular scenario? And so I think it is a double-edged sword. We're always finding ourselves trying to be education-focused and compassionate, and at the same time enforcing our bylaws. So, I think that's a long way of me telling you, Your Worship. I think we're always looking at resourcing in this particular area, having more frequent updates, whether they be quarterly or whether they be three times a year, even 2 times a year. We will look at what makes absolute sense, but I think being in front of council a lot more. You'll also start hearing from residents if expectations are being met. I suspect today and tonight's going to generate a story. It's going to generate some attention in terms of this particular update, and I think we're going to quickly hear from people what they thought about what they heard tonight. So those are my comments.
That's great. That's good. That's a little bit more well-rounded. I appreciate that very much. Thanks. Thanks very much, Mr. CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet. The committee receive and file for information report PD 09-24 regarding the Municipal Law Enforcement 2023 year-end report. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open, and I will just note that Councillor Russell did have to depart the meeting. And I'll go ahead and close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Van. We will now consider item 7.2.3, report PD 18-24 regarding the Housing Select Committee update. The Senior Planner, Mr. Josh Workington, will provide introductory comments. Josh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Council. So, as is noted in the report, the Housing Select Committee was established in late 2022 to help the town navigate the myriad of planning policy changes that were introduced by the province at that time. Building on that, though, it was also designed to build off the work that was undertaken by the previous Housing Task Force and Committee. More specifically, the committee was aiming, or is aiming, to be more active in advocating for increasing the supply of housing that can be accessed by lower and moderate income households. When we talk about that type of household, it's not just affordable rental housing, it's housing that's all along the housing continuum. So that could be supportive housing, transitional housing, etc. And as is noted in that report, this advocacy work is taking shape in several forums that have been undertaken in the past year and are ongoing. Building housing for lower and moderate income households is a challenging endeavor, but more so in Lincoln than in other areas. There's a number of reasons for that, such as the limited supply of land that's available for urban areas, which constrains the available housing supply, or land supply, I should say, limited transit, things like that. While Lincoln does have a unique context compared to other municipalities, the Housing Select Committee is working to identify how these barriers and challenges can be lessened and overcome to help meet and exceed the town's affordable housing targets. And look forward to speaking more about this and answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Do members of committee have any questions? Okay. I see none. I have, Mayor Easton.
I have one question of the council members who sit on the committee, and that has to do with the frequency of meetings and whether or not any consideration has been given with the current workload to meeting more frequently.
Councilor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. As the Vice Chair of the Housing Select Committee, I can comment that we have, in fact, had an extra meeting added. We are open to adding additional meetings as required. Committee members are open to that as well, and we are able to do that. And I do agree with you, Mayor Easton. I think with the amount of work that's coming, that we certainly do need to be meeting more frequently to accomplish our goals.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Timmers. And this dovetails nicely. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Timmers. That committee receive and file for information report PD 18-24 regarding the Housing Select Committee update. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.4, report PD 16-24 regarding review of the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. Do members of committee have any questions? Okay, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Michalek. The committee receive and file for information report PD 16-24 regarding the review of changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you very much, Devan. So we will now consider agenda item 8.1, motion to consider confidential items. Before I read the motion and we move into closed session, I would like to explain what will happen for those watching this meeting online. First, there will be a closed session statement that the Deputy Clerk will go through for staff and that will be attending the closed session remotely. Once that is completed, we will move on with the motion to move into closed session. The Deputy Clerk will be turning off the live webcast during the closed portion of tonight's meeting. Once we have completed the closed portion of the meeting, we'll resume with the live webcast and carry on with the public portion of tonight's meeting, and we will read the motions in public session. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to conduct a closed session statement for those attending the closed session remotely tonight.
Thank you, Chair. All members are reminded that any discussions in closed session are to remain confidential as per the procedural bylaw and our code of conduct for the Council of the Town of Lincoln. Before we begin, I need each member that is attending electronically to confirm the following: that you understand that matters are to remain confidential, and confirm no one else is present with you, and confirm no one else can hear this closed session, and confirm that you are not using any electronic devices other than your tablet, computer, telephone for video conferencing, and confirm that you are not recording this portion of the meeting. If you acknowledge all of the above, please reply with "I understand" and confirm to all of the statements as I read your name aloud. And I have Manager of Finance, Deputy Treasurer Kate Hanna.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
No problem. If you could please confirm all of the statements that you are not using any electronic devices, you are only using the electronic device other than your tablet, computer, telephone. You are not recording this portion of the meeting. No one else can hear this closed session, and no one else is present with you. And if you agree to all of those statements, please confirm with you understand and confirm to all of the statements.
I do confirm and understand all of the statements.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Renchema under Section 239 of the Municipal Act. Notice is hereby given that committee adjourned to closed session in order to address item 8.1 pursuant to Section 239, Part 2, Section D, labor relations or employee negotiations as it pertains to collective bargaining updates. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. Perfect, and I'll close that vote, and that motion carries.
Okay, I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to, she will proceed with the technical requirements to move into closed session now. Excellent. Welcome back. I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray. Actually, Deputy Mayor Murray. Don't want to steal her of her props. That committee resume in open session. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. And I'll close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Devan. I have a motion now moved by Councillor Reimer. The committee receive and file the confidential update as it relates to item 8.1 pursuant to section 239, subsection 2, section D, labor relations or employee negotiations as it pertains to collective bargaining updates. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open.
I did.
And I'll close that and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you, Devan. So, committee remarks. Do we have any committee remarks this evening? Okay, I see none. There being no further business, I call the meeting adjourned at 8:40 PM. Thank you, everyone.